Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello everybody and welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live video series, and I'm thrilled to have with us today to share the stories behind the 10 books that influenced him the most on his life path, Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. Don Miguel is a Negro, or a Toltec Master of Transformation, and the author of the 5 Levels of Attachment, the Mastery of Self, the 7 Secrets to Healthy, Happy Relationships, and several other books besides. And he's a direct descendant of the Toltecs of the Eagle Knight lineage, and as we all know, the son of Don Miguel Ruiz Sr., author of the 4 Agreements. Don Miguel, welcome. It's so good to have you with us.
Sarah, thank you so much for the opportunity to interact with you and everyone in this forum. So, hello.
I want to say something before we actually start talking about the book list and going through our normal routine. And that is, when I was sending out my monthly newsletter yesterday, I put your book at the top of it because you are my bookworm this month. Your book, the 5 Levels of Attachment, made a big impact on me. And I think you and I first spoke about 5 or 6 years ago when we did an interview, and it was about that particular book. And as I put it there, and I was thinking about what am I going to say as I opened this newsletter, I suddenly saw something really interesting that hadn't occurred to me before. Here we are at the end of a year in which all of us have had to let go of so many of our attachments. And I'm looking at the book title and I'm thinking, wow, this is so synchronistic that here you are, you're my bookworm for the month. And interestingly enough, several other people who should have contributed had agreed to contribute their 10 best list this month, couldn't make it. So you are the only one that we've published this month. And here you are tonight as well, at the very end of the year, talking about your own book list. And obviously we're going to talk about attachments because this clearly is the theme of these few years for us all. So yeah. I just wanted to mention that because it is so synchronistic.
Oh, thank you. My friend Shane was just talking about that. He, one of a few friends who read my books, he called me to let me know that it feels like this book, The 5 Levels of Attachment, was somehow fit this year in the sense
yes.
of if you're so attached or you identify yourself with something in this world, then all of a sudden you're going to go through a harsh contrast, because if you keep holding on to it, you're going to suffer. But if you're able to detach and then re-engage in a different way, this year will be a little simpler. Not it's going to be still difficult, of course, but the suffering will be slightly different in the sense that you're not holding on to something that no longer exists. You're engaging what is. And that's what always life is that you engage our relationship with life at this very moment. And who we are changes just as much as life changes in front of us. So in that ability to detach, we're able to see who's in front of us, especially seeing who we are within ourselves. And of course, I'm talking in a spiritual sense.
Absolutely. I was thinking today, yeah, this book has really come into its own this year. Yeah. Okay, so we normally start by asking our guests, what was the process like for you to have to go back and choose 10 books from your lifetime that influenced you the most, and also what books mean to you? So start with either one of those.
Well, the first step when I got the question was spiritual books. What were the spiritual books that influenced me? And for me, I had to question that first, because that's what will take the direction in the course. And for me, a spiritual book is something that galvanizes. It's a call to action, which is to me inspirational. What are the books that inspired me to shift a direction in life in some way and somehow? So in these 10 selections, these are books that when they came to my attention, they galvanized me in some way. They inspired me in some way. So once I was able to see it from that point of view, picking up the books was somewhat easy, because all I had to do was just simply look back on what changed my perception in life. It's what helped me, actually.
Yeah. And what do books in general mean to you?
Looking at life through someone else's eyes and letting me learn from their experiences, be it whether it's fiction or nonfiction, a book in spirituality, a book on physics. It allows me to see the world through someone else's eyes. My favorite fictional author is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And, in his book, Love in the Time of Cholera, I can experience what I felt when I was young, and one of my biggest fear, which is being in love with someone, and all of a sudden that person turns around, and up to that moment that person was in love with you, but as soon as they turned around and saw you, that love faded. And how he captured that moment when Fermina Daza turned around to look at him, and how his heartbreak felt the moment where he was expecting this beautiful re-engagement because she'd been banned from seeing him because the father did not like it. And she came back to the hometown. And when she turned around and saw him, all that love disappeared. It's like the illusion popped. And he captured it in such a way that I had the heartbreak. I felt that pain. I felt that sorrow. I felt that the breaking of an illusion like that. And it took me many, many years to see it from her point of view, because I kept relating to the main character whose name at the moment escapes me, but the feeling is there. That's what books does. Yeah. It takes me to a place where I get to experience life through someone else's eyes, and in this case, through someone else's heart. You know, you can say that it is the first place where I've ever experienced what a kiss might feel like in my imagination, until I finally had a kiss of my own. And then all of a sudden it changed everything, because for realizing that up until I physically have an experience, my mind gets introduced to an experience through someone else's narrative or sharing. And that's what it is. You know, it's like some of these books, especially the 10 books I described to you, these are things that existed in my mind until a moment came that shifted it and became an experience. So for me, that's what a book is. It's the beautiful gift that humanity has given to itself, in the sense of sharing through words, symbols, music, the experience of being alive.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. I mean, they're experiences that we might never otherwise get to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And
so,
sorry.
Carry on.
The funny thing about that moment in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's book is that even though it wasn't me who was experiencing the heartbreak of someone turning around and no longer loving you, the funny thing about that is that it impacted several relationships when I was young, that fear. And I'm mentioning it right now because these books can have an impact that even though we didn't have that heartbreak that we experience will impact my relationships. And that's not just the negative one, but also the positive. Some of those positive things impact my relationship in a very good way. You know, it's like asking, who are you today? It's something that allows me to see my wife for who she is today, and my son with autism, and my daughter with her teenage years, who they were just a week ago no longer exist. So books have that impact.
Indeed. And the first book that had an impact on you, number one on your list, I don't know whether people will be surprised or not, but it was your father's book, The Four Agreements, which you didn't read until you were 21?
Yep. I read the book came out when I was 21 years old. I bought the book, and around the third chapter, I put the book down because it was my dad telling me what to do all over again. And I didn't pick it up for another 5 years until I was going through some heartbreak of my own. You know, in 2002, my father had suffered a massive heart attack. This woman whom I fell in love with, and we were living together, we broke up. And she was the first person I ever saw as my wife, or I wanted her to be my wife. And I was going through the pain of that breakup and the consequences of all that. And I was in a very dark place, and I picked up my father's book, and it helped me out of it. And you can say that it's a book that briefly I took out my dad wrote it, and I used it the way many other people have used it. I used it to help me heal. And to some degree, it's become the basis of what I teach, even though it's my father's book and my family's tradition. And there's a reason why I put it down after chapter 3, because, I kept hearing, before it was a book, for a good 10, 15 years, it was my dad going through the whole process and sharing it with me. So as a son, I heard it from that point of view, and I heard it because I loved him. But it wasn't until that moment where I really used it that it really resonated with me. And I applied what I learned, and it helped me. So that's why I put it in first, because it's the first book outside of Gabriel Garcia Marquez that really impacted me in that way.
It's one of those books, you can hear things over and over again in many different ways, but you don't get it until you get it in the muscle. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those books that you cannot help but get it in the muscle. Mm-hmm. And it turns up again and again and again on people's lists. Mm-hmm. And I think we had David G on 2 weeks ago, a good friend of yours, and it was on his list too. And, he said some wonderful things about it, spoke about it at length, but talked about how for him, it dovetailed so well with the wisdom contained in the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. But yes, it is, the best books are the simple ones. Mm-hmm. The best books are the ones that say something and you just, the truth of it just goes all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. And the other part is that it changes, it changes based on where we are at in life, because I've read it a few times since then, and something else pops up. And it's like you said, the most simplest book sometimes has the most impact in our life.
Yeah. It had a big impact on me when I read it. And I have to say, every time it turns up on a list and I get to talk to someone about why it's important to them, it reminds me again, what I have to do as well. So it's in my mind. It's been forced into my mind again and again and again, which is a wonderful thing, because we do need reminders. Yeah.
Yes, I concur with that.
Book number 2 is an interesting one. I think one of our first guests on this series, it's only turned up once before, and it was an English author. Also loved this book, Born to Run, The Hidden Tribe, The Ultra Runners, and the Greatest Race the World Has Never Seen, by Christopher McDougall, which was published in 2010. Tell us about this book and your relationship with it.
Well, my dear friend Shane Ekloff lent it to me. He didn't give it to me, he lent it to me when we were training for a race. Before my mid-30s, I didn't run. I played soccer or football, that's what one would know it. And then I had one morning, I woke up with sciatic pain, and I was working on my laptop. Actually, this laptop that I'm engaging you right now, I was working on it, and I was in a pretzel position. And when I got up, I could not feel either one of my legs. They were like sticks. And I tried to take a step, and I just collapsed straight down, and I severely twisted both my ankles. And my soccer playing days were over at that moment, and I had to go to rehab to learn how to walk again. It's funny how that is. Like you take for granted what it is to walk. You stop thinking about it. It's something that we do every day, and then once you have to rehab and be careful not to hurt yourself again. But I still had the same issues. My lower back hurt, and there'd be times where everything below my knee would go numb. So needless to say, I gained some weight. I didn't walk and anything like that. And then one day I was goading my friends and doing something called the Tough Mudder race. And I goaded them, and they actually did it. And I realized I owe this. They told me, okay, let's do it. Okay, I'm going to do it. So I go for a run with my friend Shane, and I'm barely able to run 2 miles. In fact, I walk, run. I was not physically capable, but I was expecting to be able to run like that way I was when I was in my 20s, but I've gone through something in my life. So we came back, and he heard me give a lot of excuses. And that's when he gave me this book, Born to Run. And reading the story of Caballo Blanco and Tarahumaras and all the people who participated, La Bruja and the deer, all these symbolic names, it just got me really inspired. So little by little, I started running, because that imagery of how they described it, because they weren't running for a result, they were running for the pure joy of running. It was something, the deer itself was the actual ability to run, and you can actually run without, being first place or second. Is just this beautiful experience. So I ran, and since then I've ran 25 half marathons, and I've ran 6 full marathons, and I'm still finding ways to improve my ability to engage and still navigate my lower back, because it's still there, but it hasn't stopped me from doing something I love. So this book, watching and reading about the experience of running, and then the Tarahumaras are running with this little piece of tire tread. They're not even running with high-end shoes. They're running all this mileage on just some support. And I watched the 30 by 30 story on it, and they were describing, they run with this little tire tread because that's all they have. If they have tennis shoes, they would run in tennis shoes, but that didn't stop them from achieving what they achieved. And that's exactly what galvanized me. All you need to take a step to be able to run is just take that step. And it changed my life in the sense that I'm probably the healthiest I've ever been. At the age of 45, I'm healthier than I ever was in my 20s, and let alone my 30s. So it makes me feel young. It makes me feel inspired. And for me, around mile 2 or mile 3, I can feel the moment where my internal dialogue shuts up, where my mind just shuts up, and all that I witness and feel is the area around me, the cars passing by, because you have to keep paying attention to the cars, and the sidewalks. I've learned that one the hard way. But the only thing that I feel is my breath, my body, and I don't run with headphones. I run without music. So my breath is my rhythm. Whenever I lose my breath, I slow it down. When I feel comfortable, I run fast, and it's a real wonderful communion with my body. So this book was the catalyst for that.
Emerged from a run, feeling as though you've, you have said, that you understood why people would run as a form of meditation. Do you find that you can think more clearly, that you get ideas when you run?
Yes. Yes. Like if I was confused about something, I go on a run, and miraculously or somehow I just have the clarity to have an answer or understanding, or I would process. If I'm in a run and I get in this funk, it's because I'm dealing with a thought that perturbed me for as long as it had, and by the end of the run I have a solution. I can feel I come to peace with something. So it's definitely a place where in my run, because it's just me, it's I'm a father and a husband. My son has autism. My daughter's a teenager. My wife is engaging in her work. So, and then I tour and I give interviews and all kind of things. So for me, my runs is me time. I'm not engaging with anyone else but me. I say hello to a few other runners here and there, but it's that time, and it's going in within me without really thinking, just witnessing. Really, it's really that. All of a sudden, the path becomes clear. Not just the path that I'm running in, but the path I'm going in life. Some of my big decisions in life came from running, because in that clarity, it just felt right.
Yeah, I get that. So book number 3 was very interesting for me to research this one. I hadn't heard of it or the author, but fascinating. Fallen Leaves, Last Words on Life, Love, War and God by Will Durant, praised as a revelatory book by the Wall Street Journal. It's the last and most personal work of Pulitzer Prize-winning author and historian Will Durant, and it was discovered 32 years after his death.
Mm-hmm. His grandson was looking through all this paperwork, I believe, his son and his grandson. Will Durant and Isa Durant are the great-grandparents of my best friend, Ed, Dr. Ed Durant. Him and I went to high school together. So since we were young, he's the one person with whom I always talked philosophy with, and politics, day of life, and music. He's the one person you can say that I had the most Renaissance or bohemian conversations in my life, you know. And I read Will Durant because of my love for my friend, my dear best friend. And he's a historian. He collected a lot of the history's religion and, well, of civilization. And this book, Fallen Leaves, is kind of this, all right, I've researched all these things and here are my thoughts on my place in the world. And relationships, history, it runs the gamut. You know, there's things that you agree with and disagree with, of course, but it comes from a mind or a person, a heart that spent their whole time as a witness to humankind. And in this book, he reflected how does that all relate to him and his life. And of course, what gives it that heart is that he didn't meant for this to be a book. It's his writings, it's his process, it's his, well, his engagement. He had time, and what does an author do when you have time? You write. So he wrote, and you can feel his heart. And that's, you know, you can say it from a historian's point of view. It's an interesting approach to seeing your place within history and what he kept in relationship with his family, with how society is and what will work, what he foresees, what is it in his life, what is it with his relationship with God. And for me, it's like seeing what an elder has to say. You know, someone who, I grew up in a family where my grandmother was the head of the family, as well as my grandfather. May they both rest in peace. But my grandfather died when I was 14 years old, and my grandmother died when I was about 37 years old. So I had more time with my grandmother. And the sage advice and the communication and conversations that I heard from them were always a gift. So to hear life through the eyes of someone who knows it, in the sense of what he knew, you can't help but to apply it and see and put into perspective with your own life. My relationship with my wife, my relationship with my children, their place in history and what they're gonna witness, and the history that he even talks about no longer exists. It's a whole different world. The mere fact that you and I are talking right now through this medium proves that the world that they grew up, that we even grew up, no longer exists in that way. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is not necessarily nature, but what human creation has been. It's different, yet it's difficult, it is tough because it's our turn. And to be honest with you, that's where I tend to say life is difficult. It's only because it's our turn. And that's something I understood from Will Durant. It's our turn. What are we going to do? How are we going to contribute to history? How are we going to contribute to our family? How are we going to contribute to my neighborhood? And that's how history molds itself, my engagement.
Yeah, it'll go on my list. Another one to read. I always emerge from these interviews with, you know, an ever-growing list. Number 4, I mean, I love your list because it is quite eclectic. Number 4, How to Raise an Adult by Julie Lythcott-Haims, published in 2015.
This book, people ask me I should write a book about parenting, and I say to them, "There's no need. It's already been written. How to Raise an Adult is that book. It's it came into my life in a moment of anxiety. What's going to happen to my kids after I'm gone? And of course, that's been in my mind all my life for as long as my kids have been around. But also when I was a kid, it's like, what's going to happen to me when my parents are gone, and how it affected me back then. But there's two things that happened in the beginning of 2018. Puberty hit my son, and autism and puberty are an interesting thing. And it's the first time I realized, wow, he's gonna be 18 in just a good 5-6 years from now. What world did I bring him in? And it's the first time I really felt anxiety. So the first thing that came to my life was a movie called Black Panther, where the king, in the storyline, the Black Panther, his father dies in a terrorist incident, and the whole Marvel universe, comic book world, he goes in there, finds justice or whatever, but now he becomes the new king. So in order to become the king, he has to take on all the challengers. And in order for that to happen, he has to remove the power of the Black Panther. So he takes this solution that makes him just a normal human being. When he comes out victorious, he has to take this other essence from a flower that gives him back the power of the Black Panther, but he has to go into the underworld. And when he goes into the underworld, he sees his ancestors, and the very first person he sees is his father. And the Black Panther tells the father, "I'm so happy to see you. I wasn't ready for you for your death. I wasn't ready for you to not be here." And the father, who was so happy to see him, Briar, became serious, and he says, "The one job of a parent is to prepare his child for his own death. Have I failed you, my son?" The rest of the movie kind of it's entertaining, but that line made me shift. It kind of made me, in a sense, that's what a gig is. My job as a father is to prepare them to live without me. That's my job. It's his life. It's his journey. And not long after that, maybe even weeks, this book came into my hands, How to Raise an Adult. And it echoes that sentiment, but in a much more detailed way. How we're raising our kids to survive without us. We're teaching our kids how to thrive without us, how to raise an adult, let them experience the consequences of their own actions. And realize what drives us to be a helicopter parent is that we're so afraid of them making the wrong decision that we kind of take over for them and make decisions for them. And in result, there's a lot of kids who go to college or universities and have no idea how to even navigate. It's like we're expecting our kids to go to out there in the world, and since we're doing all these decisions for them, by the time they're alone, they have no idea how to pay a bill, how to apply for a grant, how to apply for school, how to sign up for a class. They're so used to us doing it for them that we never gave them the chance to make their own choices and how to navigate the consequences when things don't go as you plan. And Julie Linkoff, she was the dean of admissions at Stanford University here in California. Well, I say here, I'm living up, but across the way here. And she witnessed firsthand how she saw her students come in, and so many not knowing how to even function. They got into Stanford, yes, but most of them came from this helicopter mentality that it's Stanford or nothing. It's if you go to a community college or you go to a UC college, University of California college, you're not so successful. The only way is to get into Stanford. The East Coast has Harvard and Columbia. West Coast has Stanford. And you see how these kids yes, they might be book smart, but they don't know anything outside of that. So this book was written to us parents that, all right, how do we raise a child that is going to function in society? Well, how to get rid of the anxiety of what's going to happen to our kids if something were to happen to me? The answer is knowing that they can survive. And that requires trust. That requires to take that step backwards and let them see what they can do. Mm. So for me, that was the healing of anxiety, the purpose, and realizing it's their purpose. With my son, we moved the goalpost. I'm using sport analogy here. It's not going to be 18. It's going to be 21 or 27 whenever he's ready. I have friends who went to university and went to my degree and graduated with that degree. And about 5-7 years later, they changed careers, including myself. So it's already taught me that not everybody practices what they learned at the university. They change careers halfway through. So what's the hurry of pushing my son to hit this mile marker at 18? He's going to find it in his own way. And it's going to be different from my daughter, Audrey, who is in a totally different situation. She is getting straight A's and she has this desire to be competitive. That's, as a parent, I'm kind of riding the wave of my daughter's competitive nature, and she's getting straight A's only because she has this competitive thing about her. And so I'm like, I'll step back. But my wife does something brilliant. She says, if you do this, this is the consequence. If you do that, this is the consequence. Which do you choose? And she steps back and lets them choose. So this book really helped me understand what I'm doing as a parent, because one of the secrets we parents don't tell our kids, and especially people who don't have kids, is admit that we have no idea what we're doing. We're doing the very best with what we've got. And as soon as we get used to being a parent of a 1-year-old, they turn 2, making everything we knew about parenting irrelevant because the child has changed. They turn 4, they turn 8, they turn 12, they turn 30. When I was holding my son in my arms, I realized I didn't know what I was doing. I read the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. I took the class. I could swaddle a baby pretty good. And that's when I realized that my parents had no idea what they were doing. It's the moment I saw them as my peers.
Yeah.
And this book encapsulates that answer. Like, all right, how do we help our kids? Because if we see them as our peers, then all of a sudden the pressure is a little different. It's about seeing human beings doing the best with what they've got. And that's why we engage. So it's an eye opener for me, or it helped me shift my approach and how to motivate my kids to go to school and be educated. I found their strengths and what they're passionate about and use that as this guiding light into helping them figure it out and not be afraid. As for example, right now my daughter has a homework assignment of how the classic, how to drop an egg without breaking. You can't use this, you can't use that, you can't. And my desire to go in there and help her, I have to resist, take a step back. This is not my assignment, this is hers. And the only thing I told her was, all right, your teacher told you a list of what you can't use. Stop focusing on that and look at the things that you can. And the answer to how to protect an egg from falling will show up to you. But first you accept, all right, this is the parameters that the teacher says you can't use. All right, what can you use? But at that point, I step back and let her figure it out. It's her grade.
Yeah.
Not mine.
It's interesting that within just a couple of generations, helicopter parenting has become the norm. You go back a couple of generations and, kids would leave school, certainly in England, at 14, and they'd go out and there'd be adults working. Mm-hmm. And they were treated like adults. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm part of that generation where I can, I I can feel that little bit of the helicopter parenting in my parents. And then I hit middle school and my father says, all right, from now on, if this is your education, you apply for all these things. I'm not going to apply for you. And it was daunting. It was scary, but I did it.
Yeah.
Got a full scholarship to University of California for 5 years. And I had to apply every year for it. There's something to be said about giving someone the ability to make choices and experience their consequences.
Yeah.
Is that you gain confidence, and that's the gift.
That is the gift. Yeah. Many parents think they're doing, everything for their children out of love, but it does hobble them.
Because we're doing it out of fear.
Yeah, exactly. So this one kind of segues well into the topic of the next one, which I was just so pleased to see it on your list. It's the first time it's came up. I never expected this book to come up on any list. And the reason that I was so thrilled to see it is because, I've read this book. It's The Autistic Brain, Thinking Across the Spectrum by Temple Grandin. And when I read that book in order to understand my grandson, who's on the spectrum, and I know that your son is too.
Mm-hmm. Mm. It's the book that made me cry, being so happy because, my son was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. And we're talking, this is 2007. And I went through a big depression. It's how we mourn, that one tries to see an individual as this infinite possibility. But even when you hold them in your arms, somehow you get attached to a certain vision. Become a doctor, a lawyer, an activist, an artist, whatever. You kind of get attached. So when I got the diagnosis of that, his autism, that image that I projected onto him died. And I was mourning that what's going to happen to him. So a whole week I was in my depression. And one day, my son, 2 years old, walks up to me, puts his hands on my knees, looks me in the eyes and smiles. Now, if you've ever read anything about autism, you know this is huge. Looking into my eyes and smiling. It was like coming out of that and breathing again. And what am I doing? Here I am mourning the death of my son, but my son is smiling at me. He's alive. And realize that it's up to him. It's up to him to figure out life. And yes, his future is gray, but that's the truth with every one of our children. And my job is to help him. So from there, I got galvanized to looking, read book. I read book after book. And in 2007, I have to be honest in the sense that it was probably more information that the previous generation had. They barely had anything. So this book, I was looking for books and books and books for many years. And I read Temple Grandin's books. I read many others. Always looking. First it was about healing autism, and then you reach a point where you accept, no, there's no healing autism. You can help alleviate everything around it. In my son's case, anxiety and ADHD, and then Tourette's, a little bit of Tourette's, all the tics that he has, verbal and nonverbal and motor. And it was reading this book that I finally saw a book that talked to not just their humanity, but their full potential. All of a sudden, their future is not so great. And looking first, the first couple of chapters is about understanding what autism is, the science behind it, and what she's accumulated. Then she goes into describing all the different forms of perception of people in the spectrum, and then it goes into the strengths, what allows them. So it is the first book that allowed me to understand my son in the way he sees the world. Now, before the interview, we were talking about your grandson and how he educates himself through watching YouTube. And my son does the very same thing. He learns languages through YouTube. Whenever he's interested in something, he goes into YouTube and researches. If he's afraid of something, he goes look for it in YouTube. You know, spiders, he got stung by a bee. He now knows everything about bees and wasps and why he has allergies and all kind of thing. But the book also helped in this way, and I'm going to put it through this way. My son's autism affects his speech. So he's not Asperger's, because his ability to speak was impacted by the autism. So he didn't start really speaking until it was 5 or 6 years, and sentences around 8. Now he's talking abstract thoughts, but he's mostly mimicking dialogues that he sees on YouTube and on TV. That's conversation, whatever he sees. Now, with that in mind, people have been trying to teach him math for many, many, many years. And he can do it in a certain way, but he can't do it in another. We took him to learn how to play drums, because we wanted to learn music, and also drums satisfies a different, it's what's the name of that therapy? Anyways, it's a therapy that teaches you how to use all your limbs, left and right hemisphere. So, sorry, I forget the name of that therapy, but its aim is to teach him how to coordinate every part of his limb, and learning drums is exactly that. So for first 2 or 3 teachers he had with drumming, they saw him as an autistic kid, and just kind of just the basics, just do this, mimic me. Then he had this one teacher who was a little bit more rugged, he's a Southern man who likes to go into the point. So he taught him music, like to read sheet music. At first I was going, okay, good luck. But here's what happened. My son can read sheet music, and he can play. He put him a sheet music for drums. He won't miss a beat, and he knows. It's impressive. Then we went to something called fit learning. We're always looking for therapies. We're always looking for that missing piece of the puzzle. Well, we went to this place called Fit Learning, and the difference between these tutors is that they're psychiatrists who are teachers. So they're teaching them through a different approach. And they did an evaluation, and we taught them what happened with the drums. And they're like, really, he can read sheet music and play what he reads? Yeah. So they did a test, and it led to this awareness, this like aha moment. His verbal skills are below, but his nonverbal skills are high. The difference between a written sentence, say, give me 4/8 on the snare, is different to him than actually writing out 4/8 on a snare, by hitting the X and all kind of thing. He understands it because one symbol has a direct action. The other one is a bit more abstract. The reason why he can read sheet music is because there's a direct action to it, versus a verbal one that doesn't mean this, doesn't mean that. It's a little bit more abstract. So that led us to do IQ tests in his school. And the school's IQ tests confirm what Fit Learning found and what his music teacher stumbled upon. His verbal IQ is somewhere in the 50s, 48 or 52, something like that. His nonverbal IQ is 118. So one verbal, if we only measure him by a verbal test, written or said, he's going to score very low. But you do a nonverbal test, he's through the roof. He's above average. He is above average. So his teachers used that information and adapted it. So now his teacher now says, okay, one of the tough ones to teach him through math was division. He was going by memory. He was looking for answers via memory. And then, all right, 8 divided by 2. His teacher said, okay, 8 divided by 2. Let's draw 2 lines. 1, 2. There's 2. Now remember, divided in equal parts. So how many times do we have to count to 8? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many lines is that? 4. And also my son gets it. He used a totally different approach, a more nonverbal approach of describing what that those numbers represent, and now he can divide. All because we figured out how to be verbal and nonverbal and create a symbol that's direct.
Yeah.
And Temple Grandin's book, The Autistic Brain, describes that. And to be honest with you, it's not just kids in the spectrum, but we adults. I saw myself in that book in a totally different light. So it is the thing that made me think and see autism not as the villain, it's the ally. My son's gift is that he has autism. Now, it's up to him whether autism is his ally or his tyrant. And that's going to be reflected on how we see it.
Yes.
And the beautiful thing about this book is that it broke down and it helped us shed that image of what autism is and see it in a totally different light and look for different strengths. And we found it. That doesn't mean that we're out of the clear. We still got a lot to go. You know, we're still in the middle of puberty here. Let's see how, you know, things turn out in a year, and as he slowly moves away from puberty. But the beauty about it is that it's his life. So we're still looking for all these things that will help him. And thank you to Temple Grandin, but she really helped us in helping him.
Did you see the movie, Claire Danes? It gives you such an insight and how the judgments we place on people, and we want everybody to conform, and we understand their behavior according to this and not this.
Yes.
The multiple intelligences and the different ways of communication and thinking.
Yeah.
I'm just, if nothing else, my grandson has opened my eyes to so many things that I never would have looked at before. Yeah. What a gift these kids are.
They are, they are,
Yeah.
I remember when in the 90s, people used to talk about the indigo kids, yes. They're coming. And maybe that's what this is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
We'll see. It's just,
it's
just a story. But my son has taught me, and his classmates have taught me, and that scene in Temple Grandin's book, a movie, that scene when she gets up and tells a whole group of people,
yes,
how she sees it, and when when someone asked her in the audience, how do you know, how many kids do you have? Well, I don't have any kids in this spectrum. And everyone goes, no, I am autistic, and everyone turns around and goes, what? I broke down in tears. Yeah. Because, if we let that projected image tell us who they are, man, we miss out on so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when she was talking about the kid that was spinning, and she said, no, she's not doing it for that reason. I'll tell you why she's doing it. It answered so many questions for us.
Yes. Yeah. And how in the book, in the Autistic Brain, how she has a meeting with an autistic kid, and he goes and does this thing, and she describes that, he needs, and how she describes the patience to allow him to do that. And then once he's composed, come back. Wow.
Yeah. There's a lot of information that I'd like to share with you. I'll do it afterwards I'll send you an email, but I think that there's some things that I've come across that you would find very interesting. Yeah. But for now, let's move on. That is a fabulous book. I'm so glad it's there.
Om Times TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
6. Another one that surprised me, The View from the Cheap Seats by Neil Gaiman, one of my favorite authors.
Oh, mine too. I love the Sandman series and all the books he's written. I like this one, you know, as a writer, it's always nice to see, or wonderful to see, how things work. And for him, this is a collection of essays, writings, lectures that he's given. And you see how someone who is a gifted storyteller is able to put pen and paper together to create a world and describe a whole world. And it's like being an intensive course about writing without talking about technical things. It's giving you the insight of how to write from the heart and from the mind. You know, you write with your heart, you edit with the mind. And what drives you to create such worlds? The what if, what is this, what is that, and asking questions. And the answer to those questions will take you in directions that are just absolutely marvelous. You know, it makes you wonder about society. It makes you ask questions about how we've created this society and how. And in the end, it's human beings and human stories that create this society and this culture, and how we can describe those narratives, those myths into our everyday life. And as a writer myself, it's a beautiful window into the creation of inspiration and what allows you to create a novel, a story, a little book, as small as it may be, to the biggest, thickest thing. It makes you write. It makes you want to write.
There's another book which we'll get to a little further on about creativity that you really like. Clearly, this is something that you find very inspirational.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's you know, there's if you follow the pattern of the books, there is a rhythm to them. You know, the Four Agreements talks about your own self and healing. The Born to Run is inspiration. What motivates you to that healing or to that creation? Will Durant is a reflection of the past and learning from our elders. How to Raise an Adult and the Autistic Brain is how to shift your relationship, not just with your children, but with yourself and others, and see it from totally different eyes. Neil Gaiman is exercised in putting all of that into words and a narrative that allows you to understand it, because it's all literature. It's all, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, it is still that ability to put into words that allows each other to understand each other. And that's the gift of literature. We get to understand, because if I don't understand what you're saying, then it goes over my head. But if you have this ability to paint with words, this experience, this aha moment, this thought, it can move you. And going back to that image of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and the turning around of someone's eyes and looking at you, and also seeing the moment where love fades or disappears, and it's just in the written page. Wow. It's Neil Gaiman's, this book describes exactly what that power is.
Yeah. The moment when perception shifts. Yeah. So number 7, how would you describe this one then? The Variety of Scientific Experience, a Personal View on the Search for God by Carl Sagan. Published in 2006 on the 10th anniversary of his death by his wife.
So these two next two books, Carl Sagan and Stephen Hawking. So first, Carl Sagan. I love reading books on physics. And history. Those are my two favorite topics to read in my free time. I spent many a time reading biographies and then reading books on physics, astrophysics, microphysics, and all these things. Carl Sagan in this book bridges two worlds. Now, mind you, in my background, I was born and raised in duality, in juxtaposition. My father and my uncles were surgeons. My father, before he was who he is now, Don Miguel Ruiz, was a neurosurgeon, a medical doctor. My mom was a dentist. My uncle was an oncologist. My other uncle was a neurologist. My aunt is a psychologist. And my grandmother and my grandfather are faith healers. So you have contrast right there of two worlds. And they did not clash. They somehow supported each other. My grandma would send some of her patients my uncles and my father's way, and in turn they would send people over to my grandmother, because sometimes in the root of things there is that thing that heals. Like for me, in my point of view, faith healing is using the placebo effect to help people. You know, a sugar pill given to the right person who has that intent, this pill will help heal me, will be healed. There's the power of the word. There's power of the faith. Going back to words, there it is. The same energy I used to move my arms, to move my legs, is the same energy I used to create a thought. At the root of every belief I have in my belief system, there's a yes that gives it power. So witnessing my grandmother and use faith in that way. And to us, faith is believing in something 100%. It's not blind faith. It's knowing the intent of being able to take a step forward. That's what faith is to us. And she used it. And my father eventually lets go of his medical profession and becomes Don Miguel Ruiz and bridges the two of them together. And then I lived in San Diego, California, and I went to school in Tijuana, Mexico. So I lived in the United States, but went to school in Tijuana. So I grew up with two languages that I use, you know. To this very day, I dream in English and I count in Spanish. It's how my brain works. All right, Carl Sagan's, this little book is exactly that. He talks and bridges the world of physics and understanding the universe, and then talks about God and how he bridges those two things in a series of lectures. And what is pivotal in this book is, in the end, they collected all the questions and answers of each night. The people who agreed with his thesis and presentations and arguments, and people who didn't. And he talks about science and spirituality in a way that, to me, is graceful. He's not afraid to shy away of the disagreement between the two of them. But by its nature, he obviously doesn't separate them completely, because there's still this approach and acknowledgement of God. So from that point of view, this book describes a duality, a juxtaposition, to try and find a common language, not only to understand the world, but sharing that knowledge with everyone else. And people will have a totally different point of view on what you're saying. So in that question and answer section in the end, you can see how he navigates. There are people who agree and there's people who completely disagree, and how he's able to weave between them through words that allows him to bridge. Cosmos is the series that he was the host from. It's exactly that. It's to a certain degree, he's talking physics in a way that we can all understand. So when he talks about God as a physicist, it's an extraordinary thing in the desire to create that bridge of those two worlds that allows us to understand not just the cosmos, but that which is the divine. So it's a book that leads to the other book, which is A Brief History of Time, which is Stephen Hawking. But before I go into that one, this book is just how you see a master navigate two worlds and find a common place where we understand each other. And talking about physics and the space we're in, the universe, and the micro and the macro, and where's God's place in it.
Yeah, I can see why you really love that book. So tell us about History of Time. You've already said you love reading about physics. You did say that you had to read a lot of books to be able to read that one.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing. Like with going back to Carl Sagan for a brief moment, as a teacher myself, and I'm teaching my family's tradition, Carl Sagan is a good inspiration or a good teacher because he paved the way of how to bridge. And my father did the same thing with the Four Agreements. The Four Agreements, it's when he began to teach the Toltec tradition, he saw that there was a lot of superstition. So he took out a lot of the superstition and put what he calls common sense language. And that's coming from a doctor. So in the Four Agreements, the only thing left of the old Toltec stories is the intro of the story of the smoky mirror. The rest is the Toltec tradition stripped out of the superstition, and all that is left is common sense. It's simple. It doesn't talk down to anyone. It's written in a way that is we can engage, and Carl Sagan does that in a beautiful way. Stephen Hawking also does it, but Hawking tackles something that is so complex that I did read Neil deGrasse Tyson. I read I forgot the name of the Italian author. He writes the short little books, and then of course the big thick books of history. I began to tackle A Brief History in Time years ago in my 20s, and I'll tell you, it just went. I didn't understand it, and I thought it was beautiful, but I had the desire to understand what he's talking about. So I wasn't afraid to start from the very beginning all over again. And to be honest with you, physics wasn't always my strong suit. I was definitely more into the visual arts. I studied at school. I studied film and video production. I started out as a sociology major, but I switched to film and video production with a minor in theater, and I kept my still took a lot of sociology, so that's my craft. But I've always had this intrigue since I was in the International Baccalaureate in high school, where it's like in the International Baccalaureate you kind of focus on so many things, and I focused on history, I focused on literature, but I couldn't help but be intrigued by physics. I have math. I was getting straight A's in math up until calculus, and I never was able to get past a C. But I read books in physics only to be able to understand Stephen Hawking. And mind you, Stephen Hawking does a great job of doing what Carl Sagan does, which is to talk in a language that anyone can understand. And this is probably the reason why he became such a big superstar, is that he was someone who has such an incredible intellect, but didn't talk down to anyone. Here it is, here's the information, and here's how it pertains to the world. and the universe in his case. And I read all these books, and when I was ready for it, I began to read A Brief History in Time again, and I understood him. I was able to tap into his imagination, what it means by the singularity and multiple singularities, and what is a black hole, and how does that relevant to time, and how we perceive time. And also it's a way to describe the universe and the movements and the actions and the expansion and the contraction of it, that it's humbling. You look up in the stars and you see everything he wrote about flowing right in front of you. You know, the stars, how, you know, we're basically seeing a sea of corpses. You know, some of those stars no longer exist, but it took this much time to reach it. And some of the lights are flickering because there's something in front of it. And there's the time-level concept of understanding what a Big Bang is and how that happened, and the singularity of all this pressure coming in, and then all of a sudden one variation, and then it'll come back down. Now the whole concept of space and singularity. So it makes you understand that as soon as you shift perception, for example, if we shift our perception in the universe, it'll still look dramatically different. It changes. Perception will always change. Your reference in time will change according to where you're at. You know, as simple as I'm aging more being at 5,000 feet here in Reno than I was when I was living in San Diego at sea level. You know, that little difference affects my body in time and how the body relates to it, let alone the experiments they're having with the astronauts. You know, the twins, one stayed in Earth, one went up, and his DNA changed. And the funny thing is that as soon as you begin to understand Stephen Hawking, you begin to understand Einstein, because Einstein did it with all his imagination. And all of a sudden you realize you go down to Newton, you go down to all these wonderful minds that began to explore it. And, you know, a TV show called Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it all into perspective. It's a beautiful way to see your place in all creation, where Will Durant's book describes your place in society in the form of history. Stephen Hawking shares the spot where you're at in the universe, and how we are, I'm going to quote Neil deGrasse Tyson in this one, we are made of star stuff, and why that is. And all the energy in the universe equals zero. All the energy in the universe equals zero. The manifest and the unmanifest. My father talks about this all the time. All that exists is the manifest and the unmanifest. And then Stephen Hawking, the way he described it, is everything is positive and negative. And so positive being all this energy that came together to create matter, and then in the same time, it is able to disintegrate into nothing. So it's all the energy, positive and negative, or you can say amassed by gravitational pull, whatever you want to call it, to that which has no form, gravitates to zero, which means we'll all go back to one.
So number 9, wow, this was named a most anticipated book of 2018 by Esquire, Pop Sugar, the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, and Publishers Weekly. Creative Quest by Amir QuestLove Thompson. Musician, band leader, designer, producer. Talk about creativity. I mean, this man does everything. Yep. All-round cultural omnivore, culinary, entrepreneur, professor. My goodness.
And he's a drummer too.
And he's a drummer. Yes, absolutely. Maybe that's how he became so creative.
Yeah, the rhythm, you know, like it's the rhythm, it's the foundation, the rhythm and the bass.
Yeah.
Like I said, like I wrote, I haven't finished reading this book. And the reason why I haven't finished reading this book is that every time I pick it up, I put it back down to do something. It's a book that makes you do stuff. It's like you look into his world, you get inspired by what he's doing, that you put it down to put into use. And you don't have to actually do what he's actually doing. Like, for example, there's times when I've been reading this book, and all of a sudden I put it down and I'm going back to working on my own book, and then, or something that inspires me with my son. Let's go do this. Let's do that with my kids. Let's go do this with that. It's a book that sets up the what if and actually lays out the plan of making it so, and not be afraid to make it so. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid of your own judgment. It's kind of like when you write. It took me a long time to not edit as I'm writing, to trust in the purge. I call it a purge, at least. I throw up all these thoughts, all these words. I write and write and write and write and write. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. It doesn't have to be profound. Doesn't have to be beautiful. I could be a whole run-on sentence that lasts 2 pages. All that matters is that you put it on paper. Create this clay. Once you finish creating the clay, you hit save, walk away. Then when you're ready, you come back and you begin to introduce order, in the sense of put it grammatical rules. Create the sentences, create the paragraphs, give it structure. Don't erase anything, just put it into shape, hit save, walk away. Once that thought is over, come back later, and each one, you never touch the masters, you never touch each layer. Like, if you created the clay, all you hit is copy and save, never touch that again. Put grammatical rules in this particular one, hit save, never touch it away. Copy and paste, down, you start editing. And you edit because the reason why the first 2 drafts are such a mess is because you only have one reader, and that's me, and I'm able to fill in the gaps. But you begin to edit because now the reader is no longer me, it's someone else. And the rules of grammar are there to help convey that message. So that's why we edit. The book or your essay has to stand alone because it doesn't have you to answer questions. It has to stand on its own, which means when you edit, you're translating it into a language someone else can understand. That's the creative process. Yeah. That's, you first let the thought out, and it'll stick with you because it'll resonate with you all along the way. QuestLove's book is about that thing that galvanizes you to even begin to put down the clay down, to create the clay, create all this thoughts, all these movements, all this heart, and let's see where it goes. If it resonates, if it has a heartbeat. And that's when I say heartbeat, it's just another way of saying it resonates, but it has a way to describe something that you're passionate about and you want to see it through.
So he's an inspirer.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He's a muse in a great way.
Yeah, yeah. So the last book, interesting one again, Can't Hurt Me, Master Your Mind and Defy the Odds by David Goggins, published in 2018.
So like we said before, like we were talking about in the question about filling out this, one of the things, how did these books come into your life? The 4 Agreements came to my life because my father's the author. Born to Run is because my friends Shane and Brian, we both went for a run. Will Durant came to my life because my best friend is his great-grandson. How to Raise an Adult came because I was going through some anxiety, and that phrase, survive without me, came into my mind. That's Autistic Brain. My son has autism, and I kept looking for a light. Neil Gaiman came because I love the Sandman stories, and I love his stories, and this book came into my life because I just wanted to read more by him, and it's just been an absolute treasure. Carl Sagan, Cosmos. I enjoy the TV show, both the original and the newer version, and I just wanted to know what is about him. I wanted more. Stephen Hawking, is just a man who just, you know, he went through so much, but just this book in itself is just something that's been in the lore of our society, and I want to know. QuestLove, I saw it in a bookstore, I picked it up, and I couldn't put it down. I was in Portland, Oregon, and I forgot the name of the bookstore. Powell's. I was in Powell's in Portland, Oregon. I picked it up, and it never left my hands after that. David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me, came to my life because my friend Brian, he gave this book to me. It was Brian is, for many years, he's an avid runner, and he finally qualified for Boston. And in that time, he was looking for, books that him and I share a lot of books and running and all these kind of things. And, my brother gave me a book for Christmas called Life with a Seal. And it talks about this adventures of this enterprise businessman who sees this one Navy SEAL do a crazy race, 100 miles in San Diego Bay, going around in circles, and he goes, who is this guy? So he has them come train him for a month, and he creates this blog, and he published the blog. And he didn't name my name, but in this particular edition, he finally decides to give it. So he says, David Goggins. I give this book to Brian, A Life with a Zeal, and Brian in return comes back and says, here, he released a book. Really? I read it. It is the most in-your-face, hardcore. He pulled no punches. It's not elegant. It's not beautiful, but man, he describes the hardship he had to go through. Living with his father who was abusive, who was friends with Rick James, the guy who sings Super Freak. He's super freaky. Ow, dun, 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 dun. And describes growing up in that environment of heathenism, I guess you can describe it, but basically a very tumultuous family life, and he wasn't supposed to amount to anything, and then he is moved to the Midwest, where he's probably the only Black person in that little community, and he experiences racism in a way that's just dramatic. So he goes after trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, and the way he got out of it was with his body, athleticism. And he decided there was a recruiter, a military recruiter, that kind of spoke to him and opened up his possibilities in the military. And at that point, he already had a kid. He was in a marriage that was loveless, but he decided to go for it. And discipline was introduced into his life, and it changed him completely, to the point where, to a certain point, a little obsessive of trying to reach all these goals, but he was able to run some of the most toughest races in the world. And he learned it by experience, and he just kept going and going. And all along, in order for him to achieve it, he had to change himself. And he overcame all that. He became this holder of records of not just running, but pull-ups and things like that. He's in phenomenal shape. But then the main part of this book was not just his ability to overcome all these excuses to not do anything, but then he achieves it, and his body begins to break down because, yes, he worked and worked and worked, but when he was a SEAL, a man came to give a class about stretching, and he disregarded it because, like, I don't need to stretch, And funny, my wife is the same way. She's like, oh, she runs like a cheetah, my wife, but she never stretches, and I stretch. but he's the same mentality. I don't need to stretch. And then when he got hurt and his body began to lock down, because all of a sudden he was so tight, his body was so tight that blood wasn't circulating so well. So his body was starting to break down. And then he remembered this lecture, and it was like a seed that blossomed. I need to take care of myself. So he began to stretch and stretch and stretch. And all of a sudden, he went from almost dying to once again running, but now he has this balance. He found this balance that allowed him to continue doing it. And to this day, if you go to his Twitter or Instagram account, you can see him still, he routinely gives advice to people about staying in your discipline, staying in what you want to attain in life, and is a motivational speaker in this way, and motivates so many kids, especially when he shares the story that, like, I was supposed to be this gang member, I was supposed to be nothing, and here I am. Look at everything I've created, not in form of riches, but in his own craft. Man, it inspires you to go out there and start running. In my case, and that was the original intent, but I used it for so many other things. It reminds me of a teacher once taught me this lesson. The key to enlightenment is effort. That's it. That's all she said. And this is in Mount Shasta in a lecture. She said this. And I began to process that line. Effort is using the energy that animates this body. It's the energy to apply, to take one step forward. That's what effort is. Discipline is simply remembering to apply that effort every day. That's all discipline is. And success is following through. That's what I've understood from her teaching in this book. It's kind of like my father's book, Always Do Your Best. It's in the 4 agreements, there's one little chapter that talks about always doing your best. Well, David Goggins' book it's all about that. It's about love, in a sense of letting go of all these things that stops you from doing it.
Yeah.
And that's my interpretation of it, of course. But in my point of view, it's a story that if you allow the projected image that you're surrounded gives you, then you will always be trapped by it. But if you're willing to break out of it, and yes, it's going to be difficult at times, you can achieve so much. It's a certain degree. This book, it's like, if you look at these 10 books, they're all correlated. They're all intermatched. The Autistic Brain combined with Can't Hurt Me. Yeah, it's the thing that I'm not going to stop autism from being my son's father, but and autism is not going to be the thing that stops him from being who he is. We're going to break through the projection, and all of a sudden you realize that the projection that people have is that autism is your tyrant, but if you break through that, autism is your ally. It'll give you strength. And it's exactly that. It's a humble story of someone who didn't let that projection affect him. Yes, he has issues. He's not a perfect guy. He has his relationships with his partners fall apart here and there, but eventually it works out. It's a work in progress. And to me, it's one of the most inspiring books I have ever read, because he never pretends to be this type of guy. He always describes himself as this guy who didn't have better, but he got there in a way that is unorthodox. And you can say that if someone used their time meditating, he used it by moving. And
it reminds me of the saying that the only failure is not trying. Yeah, I mean, it says the notes that I looked up said that he says that most of us tap into only 40% of our capabilities. He calls this the 40% rule, and says that we can all push past pain, demolish fear, and reach our full potential, and that's really what it's all about, isn't it?
Yes, getting out of our comfort zone and making the uncomfortable comfortable.
So, of these 10 books, if somebody asked you to give them something to inspire them on their journey, whether it's a spiritual quest, whether it's a personal, quest for knowledge about self-knowledge. Which is the book that you would recommend the most to inspire somebody?
The funny thing is that the person would ask me is always morphing. It's because these 10 books are books I've actually recommended to people in different ways. If you're a parent, have definitely How to Raise an Adult. And you can say out of all these books that are in front of me, that's the book that I've recommended the most, besides, of course, The Four Grins, because he's my papa, of course, and it's helped so much. But How to Raise an Adult is the book that I've recommended the most, because I tend to talk to my peers who are also parents, and in all my teachings, when I talk about the Four Agreements, and they ask me, well, how can I apply it with my kids? And the closest book I have ever read that comes close to being the parent book of the Four Agreements is How to Raise an Adult. Don't take it personal, don't make assumptions, always do your best and be impeccable with the word. That one, I would say it's the number one book I recommend. To be inspired by and creative quest. Only because it's the difference. As you saw, there's a pattern to this, and Creative Quest and David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me, they also go together. If Creative QuestLove has done so much, it's like both of them, David Goggins and QuestLove, have, if you look at their body of work, they've made so much, but in different facets. Where QuestLove is in the arts, music, visual stuff, David Goggins is in the personal growth in his physical body, and it's taking him out. Both have taken themselves out of tough places by being themselves. So if I were to recommend that, those two books together would go along. But it always depends on who's asking me. It's like, in the book, The 7 Secrets to Happy, Healthy Relationships, and we talk about, it has one voice. It's co-written with my friend, dear friend, Heather Ashamara, but the book is not a he said, she said. It's one voice that changes gender as the chapters. And one of the reasons why that is that it's not about understanding men and women. It's about understanding the person in front of you. So in order for me to answer which one is according, is I have to see who's in front of me.
Yeah.
And what do they need in that moment? If they need healing, Four Agreements, hands down. If they want to understand life, Will Durant. If they want to deal with kids, How to Raise an Adult in the Autistic Brain, both those books will be will give you insight. And if you want to have this beautiful light that allows you to see the light at the end of the tunnel in regards to autism, then Autistic Brain is your cake. Yeah, it's about understanding who's in front of you.
Yeah.
But
and that's a good answer. I mean, it's interesting that your list, I think, really does serve that. It serves every eventuality. I mean, there's other lists and people will pick one book to inspire somebody, but I've not seen such a complete list that seems to cover many different aspects.
Thank you.
It's been a really interesting one to read, to digest. Certainly you've inspired me to read some other books. In closing, I want to go back to where we started at the beginning when we talked about the 5 levels of attachment being, could have been written expressly for this past year and next year. It's difficult, talking about attachments, because it doesn't matter how many we let go of, there's always more, always. But is there one, if you had to write that book today, is there one thing that you would add to it that wasn't there before?
Yes, I actually added it in the Mastery of Self. That's why it's in there again. It's an attachment is a healthy thing when the time comes to let go and you're able to let go of it. It's engaging a moment And when the moment's over, you're able to disengage, engage, disengage, engage, disengage, attach, detach, attach, detach. That's healthy. It becomes unhealthy the moment when it's time to let go and we can't. And that's when we start holding on to something that no longer exists. And it requires a lot of energy to keep it. If you look back on our life, imagine that you were able to remember every single moment in your life. The thing is that we have to use our imagination because we have forgotten a lot of things. Life allows us to let go, like opening our hand in a river. The river will take it. That means the things we hold on to is because we use energy to keep it. In a good way or in a bad way, impactful, negative, positive, whatever. It takes effort to hold on. But the past only exists because we keep saying yes to it. We keep it alive by using it as an identity, our sense of self, our sense of purpose. But the moment we decide to open up, it'll go away. Just like every thought, every memory we have. The beautiful thing about that is, like my brother uses the analogy. It's like you sit in the river and you open your arm, your hand, and you'll see what the river takes away. If you keep your eye on that thing, that's all you'll see. But it'll prevent you from turning around and seeing what the river brings to you. And that's what life does. As soon as you let go, you're able to engage that which is coming.
Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., it has been beyond a delight to spend this time with you tonight. I really have enjoyed this conversation. You know, there are so many words of praise in the chat room. I don't imagine that you've had a chance to read them, but, you know, everybody has really resonated. There has been everybody who's been, you know, a contributor to the book club has been a wonderful interview, but there has been a layer to this one of such personal openness from you that I think just has really resonated with everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for giving us your list. I know there's a reason why yours is the only list published this month, and it happens to be the month that your book is my bookworm as well. None of that was planned, but it's just turned out that way. So obviously it's divine timing. Thank you.
It is. We live in a beautiful time where we see as humanity, and now we get to choose how do we choose to engage it. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to engage you in the book love. I wish everyone a happy 2021. May life bring joy and wisdom, and we keep in mind everyone we love. You know, this morning I got news that a classmate of mine from elementary, middle school passed away from COVID. And he was a guy who, you know, was always happy, always smiling. He leaves behind a child and a wife. And he's young, he's my age. But then again, I feel young, so that's why I was saying he's young. One of the things about accepting death and that every relationship ends is that it helps us not take for granted the relationships we have. Enjoy them. Have fun. Be present and enjoy those moments with the people you love. Tomorrow's not promised, but if you're alive to enjoy it, it's a beautiful present.
Beautiful parting words. Yes, and a wonderful reminder for moving forward. Don Miguel Ruiz, thank you.
Thank you.
And to everybody at home, thank you for joining us. I'm going to leave it here tonight. You know where to find us. If you want to know more about Don Miguel's work, you can go to his website, which is Miguel Ruiz Jr, jr.com. Thank you. Good night, everybody.